as you saw, the topic for tonight is what is the purpose of marriage? Okay, I want to start by asking you, what do you think is the purpose of marriage?
That's all right.
So, 如果判了解释有一个问题 what is the purpose of marriage?
Reproduction.
Reproduction. Okay, that's a fancy word there.
That's right, I'm lazy.
Sex.
And
I didn't say that.
Okay. Other purposes for marriage?
Companion.
Companionship. Okay, companion. Here's
well,
another.
can you guys even read this? I can barely read this.
Try this.
Okay, no, that's like a real pen. Yeah.
Not good.
Okay, we're just gonna. There.
Other purposes.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah.
Companionship, reproduction, sex. That was Greg's. You can give him a hard time for that one. Financial support. Okay.
Yeah, don't worry about him. Yeah, that's right.
Others? You could say it in Hmong too. That's okay.
So your parents don't nag you?
Oh, okay. Get married so your parents don't nag you. That's the purpose of it.
Yes.
Okay, but some of that is social, right? Social pressure. One purpose we get married is social pressure. Okay.
So why is it important to ask this question? Why is it important to ask the question, what's the purpose of marriage? Well, I think it's important for a few different reasons. Okay? So the first one, let's look at this. Okay, now, some of you have seen this tool before. For others of you, this is a new thing. This is a rather odd tool. And I always think it looks kind of like a little dinosaur mouth. I feel like I should put some eyes on top of it and just go like... No, okay, so here's a tool. What do you guys think this tool is for? Take some guesses. What do you think?
Plier.
Okay, it's a form of pliers, okay? What else? Maybe like a wrench type thing. Yeah, what do you guys think? A cable stripper that like strips the plastic stuff off cables.
Crimper?
A crimper, maybe that attaches the plastic stuff on cables.
Is that a pipe cutter?
Maybe a pipe cutter. You grab it and you start twisting and it cuts the pipe. Okay, so lots of different things and ways this tool can be used. So this tool is actually a wire crimper specifically for coaxial cable designed for your television. So this is the cable this is the thing that actually attaches the little metal part to the end of the black cable part. And that's the sole purpose of this tool. Now, why is that important? Because if I try to use this tool for other things, I am not going to have much success. If I try to use this to like repair my toilet, not going to work. I could use it to like pierce my ear. That'll just be painful. It's really important to know the purpose of a tool so that you can use it correctly. Similarly, it's really important to know the purpose of marriage so that you can use it or you can live it out correctly. Okay? So that's the first reason why it's important to ask this question. Okay, the second reason is I actually believe that a lot of the disagreement that comes between husbands and wives happens as a result of differing views on the purpose of the relationship. And that's kind of what's below some of the conflict that you guys live out, is differing views on the purpose of marriage. And then third, you sort of have to know the purpose in order to know if you're doing it well. How do you know you're doing marriage well? Is it just an absence of arguments? Is it that you have lots of kids? How do you know if you're doing marriage well? If you don't know the purpose of marriage, you have no way of judging and knowing if you're doing it well or if you're doing it poorly. I think this is a critical question to ask What's the purpose of marriage? And so that's why we're sort of spending today. We're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about this. So, I'm going to ask a question. You can just think, you don't have to offer up, raise your hand or anything. So this one just sort of a question for your head here. What do you think are the most important passages about marriage in the Bible? So go ahead and kind of think. Maybe you've heard stuff in sermons, and maybe you're like, what are the most important passages in the Bible about marriage? Well, at least in the New Testament, the two largest passages, and that's one of the ways you can tell something's kind of important. If Jesus spends 5 verses talking about something versus 1 verse, maybe it's worth paying attention. And Jesus talks about in Matthew 19, there's a question that some people ask him about divorce. And he talks on that one for about 5 verses about that. And that's actually one of the largest times Jesus talks about marriage. There's really not a whole lot in the Bible directly about marriage. But that's one chunk. It's actually one of the largest times Jesus talks about marriage, is in Matthew 19, talking about divorce. Now, if you look at Paul, the single largest time he talks about marriage is in Ephesians 5. And that's like 11 verses. That's the husbands and wives section of Ephesians. And that's huge. There's nothing else that even comes close to that. Now, what's interesting is when you look at both of those passages, both Jesus and Paul, they both refer back to the same verse as one of the bases of their argument. Think about it. Both of those, the two largest passages from Jesus and Paul, they both refer back to the same passage in the Old Testament. It's kind of like, imagine like the first Kung Fu movie. That was the first time a family got slaughtered, and the one kid who survived as a child grew up to seek revenge against the people. And then every movie just copied it. Because you know that's the plot of every single Kung Fu movie. Okay? And so imagine being that first one that everybody else refers back to. That's what we see in the Bible. And that passage that both Jesus and Paul refer to comes out of Genesis, comes out of the creation account. And Genesis 2:24 to be exact. They both quote it. Genesis 2:24 says, "That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." So you know what? I think if Jesus refers to it and uses it as part of his argument, and Paul refers to it and uses it as part of his argument, we better pay attention. We better pay attention to that verse. And that's why I will argue, and we will both kind of argue in this, that is actually the core, primary purpose of marriage, is oneness. Oneness. Genesis 2:24 talks about that idea of being united in and becoming one. Everything else is based off that. Jesus' argument for divorce is based off, or against divorce, is based off that. Paul's argument of husbands and wives is based off that. It really is the foundation. And that's why it's critical. And I believe the Bible sort of supports this idea that that is the single most important verse in the entire Bible about the purpose of marriage. So that's going to be what we talk about today. And when we talk about that in Genesis 2, we're going to talk a little in Genesis 1 as well. And so we've got a handout here. I'm going to pass the mic on to Foua, and I'll pass out this handout.
So what is oneness? We're going to look at what oneness is. Can you hear me? Okay. So while the handout is coming out, we're going to read Genesis 2, verse 15 through 25. It's right there on your handout. Genesis 2, 15 through 25.
Actually, why don't you give us a second? Let me get a few more of these out
Okay.
for folks.
Sure.
So, stall, tell a joke or something.
So what do you think of when you hear the word one? One. one mean to you? Single? Okay. I'll stand still. One.
Okay.
I think that was me.
Okay. Oh, sure. You're
All right,
sort of
then
still
let's
there.
let's look at what the Bible says
Close
oneness is. Genesis 2:15 through 25. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. And the Lord God commanded the man, "You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. For when you eat from it, you will certainly die." The Lord God said, that's not there. That's what I put in there. The Lord said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Now the Lord God had formed out of the ground all the wild animals and all the birds in the sky, and he brought them to the man to see what he would name them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that was its name. So the man gave names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the wild animals. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, and while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. And the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. So this is the verse that both Jesus and Paul referred back to. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. So what is this one flesh, this oneness that Genesis talks about? And we're gonna look at the passage. The answer is in the passage itself. So you and I don't have to make up an answer. We don't have to guess what God meant when he said, "I'm going to put a man and a woman together and they're going to become one." The first thing we find is that oneness means leaving. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother. Okay, it's usually not what we think of. In our culture, it's the woman who leaves her father and mother, and she becomes whatever he is, right? In the Jewish culture, it was the same. They were a culture, a patriarchal culture, where the wife comes to live with the husband's family. And it was expected that the husband and his family would usually live in one tent, and if not in one tent, then at least right next door to each other. So it's very interesting that when God told us how to be husband and wife together, that he would tell us that it's the man who has to leave his mother and father. So what does it really mean to leave? In this version, it says leave. In older versions, it actually says forsake. To forsake. Muchache. Not just, go live somewhere else, but it's muchache. To forsake. This is a very harsh word. Right? You have to forsake your mother and father. So, we have to understand then, what does forsaking look like? Because it doesn't mean don't live with your mother and father anymore. Because for the Jews, the husband still lived with his father and mother, and he brought his wife to live with them. So then we have to understand that forsake has many deeper meanings than just to leave. Okay? Forsaking or leaving your mother and father, for you husbands, means that you remove your attachment to your parents. And we're going to look at the second thing we do is cleave. Okay? But in order to be one with your wife, You have to leave whatever you were one with before. Okay? So leaving means emotionally as well as physically. We have to leave those that we used to be attached to and go attached to our wives, if you're a husband. Okay. I think the reason why the Bible doesn't have to tell women to leave is we're expected to do that. And we sort of do that. Because part of the curse for Eve was that she would long for her husband. She would want to be with Adam. So she doesn't have a problem with leaving. But really it's men. It's men who have a hard time leaving their parents. And I know this is a hard one, especially in our culture, in our Hmong culture. Because your parents teach you, men, your parents teach you that they are your first priority, not your wife. And the Jewish people taught this to their sons too, which is why when the writer of Genesis wrote, he said, "For this reason, a man shall leave his mother and father." And it's emotional leaving. You can still live with them, and now your first loyalty must be to your wife. You must put her needs first. And you need to depend on her now. And that's very difficult to do. But if you don't, then it's hard for you to become one with her. Because you are still one with your parents. Okay? So I know this is, again, it's right there. A man shall leave his mother and father. Psychologically, emotionally. So you might ask yourself these questions then. Am I still looking to my parents for support? Am I still going to them for encouragement? Am I still going to them to help me make decisions? Does their decision mean more than what my wife wants or what my wife thinks? Okay? And I'm going to say the same if you're a wife. Sometimes wives don't leave their families either. And they say, well, you know, my mom won't let me do that, or my parents wouldn't let us do that. So it's equally hard for men and women, but harder for men in our culture to leave. Okay? And if you don't believe this verse, then the rest of tonight, what we're going to say, won't make any sense to you, because the next thing about oneness is that you have to cleave. To cleave. The verse here is, that is why man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife. So this version says united. Older versions say cleave. This is the idea in the Old Testament. This word is used to mean to stick to or to be glued to. Okay? So if you don't leave, then you can't cleave. So if you don't buy into this idea of I have to leave emotionally and psychologically my parents, then I can't cleave. Okay? So those two it's a two-step process. In cleaving is the idea, in Job uses the same word or a similar word, and it's the idea that my skin cleaves to my bones. Okay? So this picture that you stick together, and if you took it apart, it would be very painful. Okay? So this idea of cleaving. The word for cleaving, or as we have it here, united to his wife, can also stand for being loyal to. So the Bible in 2 Samuel 20, verse 2, talks about how David was the leader and his men cleaved to him. They were loyal to him, they followed him, and they would go wherever he goes. Okay, so that idea of cleaving, cementing together. And then several times in the Old Testament, this word cleaving also was used to show that the people of Israel cleave to God, that they would follow God and they would obey Him and they would love and serve Him united like that. Okay? So we have emotional and psychological cleaving so that you can physically and psychologically cleave to your spouse. Okay, and in this case, it's telling the man that he needs to cleave to his wife. But the two of them will cleave to each other. So cleaving, this is the fun part. Cleaving can mean then sexual union, right? Because when you're next to somebody that close, that their skin attaches to your bone, that's a pretty good picture of what sex is, right? The cleaving together. And there's something beautiful about that God intended for a man and a woman, that they would cleave to each other. But it's not just physical, it's also emotional. That emotional connection that I talked about earlier, that you feel loyalty towards. I like the Hmong word for emotional cleaving, yung bo sha, right? It's like my heart is right next to your heart, and they just beat together like one. Okay, I'm sure some of you guys have said that to your wife when you were dating her.
Yeah.
Good job, John. Thank you. That's why I know. Okay. But emotional cleaving is this idea of sharing your heart and sharing your mind. And I've been thinking a lot about why none of the animals could be one with Adam. I have dogs and I love them as much as you love your kids. But there's something about they can't connect with me the way another human being can. And I think that's that spiritual connection where we share our thoughts and feelings and our hearts with each other. You really open up your heart and they open up their heart to you. And animals can't do that. As much as they can love us unconditionally, they can't really open their hearts up to you. And when you open your heart up to them, they just lick you. You know? So there's no mutual knowing of each other. So cleaving means physical becoming one, cleaving, but it also means emotional connection. And I like this verse in Deuteronomy 24. The Israelites believed, or God believed, because He gave this rule to the Israelites, that it is so important for a husband to cleave to his wife, that there is a law in Deuteronomy 24, verse 5, that said, if a man just got married, he is not allowed to go to war. He has to stay home with his wife for a whole year. And I like the way the New International Reader's Version says it. It says, don't send him to battle. Don't give him any duty. He's free to stay home for 1 year. He needs time to make his new wife happy. That's what that translation was. This idea that they need to learn to cleave together. Okay, so a whole year. And the third reason why, or oneness, what oneness looks like, is that they become one. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, cleaving, and they become one flesh. They become one. This is that idea of oneness. And so we talked about oneness in sex, but I want to read this verse to you in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 4, where Paul talks about physical oneness. He says, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, also, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. So in his culture, they agreed with the first sentence. The wife's body belongs to the husband. But Paul added, and the husband's body belongs to the wife. Why? Because they're one. I mean, when you're one, what you have is mine, and what I have is yours. What I do to me, I do to you. And what you do to you gets done to me too. That's the idea of oneness. And if you don't believe that, then Paul says in 1 Corinthians 6:16, he says, do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two shall become one flesh. Again, Paul goes back to Genesis, and Paul says, when you have sex with someone, you have just become one with them. Because your bodies have become one. And that's not good if it's not someone who you're married to. But when you're married to them, it's beautiful. It's the way God designed it. This oneness in the flesh. But oneness is also about emotional oneness. It's about unity. Being together. Being on the same page. If you are one, and one of you goes over here, the other one also goes over there. That's what unity looks like. Disunity looks like this. And we would say, those two are not one. One is going over here and the other is going over there. But when you are one, you will move together and you will go in the one same direction together. And there you are united. So a question to ask yourself is, do I see myself as part of a whole, a part of oneness in this marriage? Or do I see myself as an independent person who can decide when I want to be one and when I want to be on my own? Okay. Are there any decisions where you're like, I can make this on my own? Okay. Or are you, every decision is about us? Okay. So if we put all that together, the leaving, cleaving, and becoming one, here's a working paraphrase that somebody, Charlie Mudd, wrote this. So he said, it's sort of like this. As Adam and Eve were literally one flesh, a man shall forsake his dependence on his mother and father and join himself in heart and soul to his wife, and they shall unite themselves with each other to such an extent that they function as one person, as if with one body, one soul, and one purpose. And that's the beauty of the leaving, cleaving, and becoming one. But when you do that, there's a fourth thing that happens in oneness. When you're joined at that deep level. And verse 25 of Genesis 2 says this, Adam and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. What a beautiful picture that physically they weren't embarrassed with each other, and emotionally they were not embarrassed with each other. Because when you know yourself, each other that deeply, when you're one, you know pretty much everything about the other person because they've shared themselves with you, and you've been that close to them, that you've seen them. And yet there is no shame in it because you are one. If you think about them as part of you and you are part of them, then you don't need to be ashamed. So those are the four ways that oneness happens in marriage.
So now that you've got a little bit of a picture of what oneness looks like, why is it important? Why is it important to have oneness? And Genesis gives us some clues about that as well. And it gives them some clues about why it's not just important, but it's almost critical. It's necessary. It's essential. Now to do this, we have to go back a chapter into Genesis 1. And there are three reasons that when I look through Genesis 1, part of the creation account as well, that I see three pieces there that are almost dependent on oneness. Okay, so I'm going to read a few sections, particularly this is Genesis 1, starting with 26. Okay, so starting with 26. Then God said, let us make man in our image. And that really is actually better translated as, let us make mankind. Not talking about making a male person, but let us make humanity. Let us make mankind in our own image, in our likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over all the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind, God created humanity in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So the first reason we need oneness is to reflect God's image. The first reason we need oneness is to reflect God's image. What's amazing about Genesis 1 there is both male and female were created to reflect God's image. And if you look here at Genesis 1, that both male and female, it's not that male reflects God and female doesn't. It's that both of them, male reflects God and female reflects God, God's image, and made them male and female. And there's something about the oneness that happens in a husband and wife that reflect part of God's image. A husband and wife who are united as one, who are living in oneness, reflect part of God's image in a way that a single person doesn't. Now, a single person still reflects God's image. I want to make that very clear. I don't believe that the only way we can reflect God's image is to get married. That's not what the scriptures say. But there is something that's different. When a husband and wife are united as one, the way that they can reflect God's image. And it's not that a man reflects God when he leads strongly, or a woman reflects God when she bears children. That's nowhere in Genesis 1. In Genesis 1, it's man and woman reflecting God, simply because that's the way God created them. So women, I've got great news for you. Your value does not come from your husband. Your value comes from God. Because he created you in his image. Your value and your worth does not come from a man in your life. And this is a thing that kind of trips people up. I know just yesterday I got an email from a high school girl through my blog. I don't even know where she lives. Never met her, don't know her. And it was this very question. And she was saying, a friend of mine and I were talking about the guys that we like, and she told me that I should find my value in God and not in a guy. What value, and this was her question, what value can I find in God that I'm not supposed to find in a guy? And that was her question that a youth emailed me out of nowhere. And so I replied back with some of the stuff that I'm sharing today. So we need oneness in marriage to be able to reflect part of the image of God. The second reason we need oneness, the second reason we need oneness comes in the next verse, in verse 28. So in verse 28, it said, God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Now remember, he's talking to both the man and the woman right now. He's not just talking to the man. He's not dividing up roles here. Women, you bear children. Guys, you subdue the earth. No. This is a group command that he is giving to both man and woman. And so he says, God blessed them and said to them, to both of them, both of you be fruitful and increase number. Both of you fill the earth, and both of you subdue it. Both of you rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, I give both of you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be both of yours for fruit. And so there's this amazing thing that happens, and he continues. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so. God saw all that he made, and it was very good. And on the evening, there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. So this is a command that God's giving to both a man and a woman. And somehow, we've kind of taken this to sort of divvy up the roles. Think about it. Guys, you take the outside stuff. Wives, you take the inside the house stuff. Wives, you raise the kids unless there's a problem. Dads, you discipline the kids when there is a problem. And one of the few times I ever see men and women working side by side is out in the garden. Which is great. I love it. So it's not about roles. In Genesis, God doesn't talk about roles. Now there are some passages elsewhere in the Bible that talk about some differences between husbands and wives. But that's not in Genesis 1 and 2. From the curse on, then there are some differences. But this is not about roles. Husbands, you do this. Wives, you do this. It was a joint task. So we need oneness to accomplish a common mission. Husbands and wives have a common mission that they can't accomplish apart from one another. They can't do it solo. And God gave them a joint mission. And when husbands and wives are living as one, they can truly accomplish that mission that God first gave to the first husband and wife. Third, the third reason why we really need oneness is we need oneness to be complete. And we need oneness to be complete. Genesis 20, oh there it is. So let me read Genesis 2, 18 and 20. Now this one's Genesis 2, this one's on your handout. Okay? So starting with verse 18. The Lord God said, "It is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." Now the Lord God formed out of the ground all the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them. And whatever the man called each living creature, that was the name. And then to 20. So the man gave all the names. Okay, you're Joe, you're platypus, you're giraffe, all of that. And then take a look at 21. The end of 20. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. There's that phrase again, suitable helper. It's repeated twice. God sets out to say, I want to create a suitable helper for Adam. And then he creates all these animals. And none of them were quite a suitable helper for Adam. And now unfortunately, that phrase has really been abused. Because if you look at this verse between verse 18 and verse 20, everybody seems to agree in verse 18 that it's not good for a man to be alone. Both husbands and wives tend to agree with that. Because let's face it, okay guys, your wife goes away for the weekend and you're home. Like the first day, woohoo! I'm just spending the whole day in my boxer shorts. I'm not showering. I'm just going to eat the most junk food in the house. And you're loving it. I'm going to watch sports all day and not move from the couch. Day 2, still kind of fun. Day 3, what happens by about the end of day 2 or 3? Oh, I miss her. Life kind of sucks. And you've eaten all the junk food and you can't really cook. And so you're like, let's go get pizza. But I think I hear this over and over again from husbands. That like it first starts out great, but bottom line, when the guy's alone, it doesn't usually end up. Usually, like guys are miserable alone. Guys agree with the fact that it's not good for Adam to be alone. And wives agree, because they come back to the house and they're like, oh my gosh, how could you do that much damage to the bathroom in one weekend? So even wives agree. Everybody agrees with this one. But there's a lot of agreement with the next part. This idea of a suitable helper. Because I believe that phrase has really been abused. And unfortunately, it's been really abused by men. We're sort of the ones responsible for completely blowing this phrase out of the way God intended it. So I'm going to teach you a little bit of Hebrew here. That idea of the suitable helper, there's a little Hebrew phrase called azer. It's the same, if you've ever heard of Eliezer, the Old Testament, it's the same one. Or Ebenezer is also pronounced Ebenezer. That azer. That's a little Hebrew term that's used in this suitable helper idea. But the problem with that, the translation of suitable helper, it kind of sounds like a cook with skills. Let me find somebody who cooks good enough. Or let me find a really good maid. Okay, that's kind of what suitable helper means. You get that picture? But that's not at all what azer means. That's not at all what the Bible actually talks about. This word azer actually refers more to a helper corresponding to the man. It's another way to translate it is a helper that matches the man. A lot of women really dislike this phrase, suitable helper. Because they feel like it sort of puts them down into the position of servant. My wife's been watching a lot of Downton Abbey lately, and so I've been catching a bit now and then. And Downton Abbey, there's the upstairs and the downstairs, and there's the royalty, and then there's the help, the servants. And I think this idea of suitable helper, I think a lot of men have taken that to be Downton Abbey. I'm the Lord who lives upstairs, and my wife is the helper who lives downstairs. But that's not what this is. What God meant with this word azer is a matching, a corresponding person that matches. None of the animals matched Adam. None of the animals fit Adam. None of them corresponded to him. So God created something else. God created a woman that could match the man, that could correspond to the man. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying that men and women are identical. One look at the two of us makes that pretty obvious. That's not what this is about. It's not identical, made a woman identical to the man, but corresponding and matching. Okay? Now what's interesting is when you look at this little word azer and look at other ways it's used in the Old Testament. This isn't the only time that word is used. Let me give you just a couple of the examples of how that word azer is used in the Old Testament. So Psalm 30 verse 10 says, "Hear, Lord, and be merciful to me. Lord, be my azer. Lord, be my help," is how they translate it. Or later on in Psalm 54 verse 4, it says, "Surely God is my azer. God is my help. The Lord is the one who sustains me." So this word azer is actually used 21 times in the Old Testament. If you go to the root of azer, that root of helper, it's actually used over 100 times. And almost every single time it's used to describe God. And it's used to describe God delivering the Israelites from captivity, from slavery, from sin. This word azer is a powerful word. There's nothing downstairs about an azer. Because I'm not about to put the Lord in the downstairs of Downton Abbey. I'm sitting in the upstairs and I'm putting God in the downstairs. That's not how it works. This word, so ladies, man, this word azer is a powerful word. So when God said, I want to create a suitable helper, He's using a word that He uses for Himself. And I don't know about you, but that almost makes me jealous that I'm not a woman. God didn't use azer to describe the man. That powerful word that He uses to describe Himself, He used that to describe the woman. So I think there's that sense that that is this completeness. That's the partnering. It's the correspondingness between husband and wife. So Azer, this suitable helper, is not a second-class word. This is a stand up tall, right next to the man word. Because this is the word God uses for himself. So we need oneness. We need it to be complete. We need it. We need it to reflect God's image together. Because there's something about marriage that a single person can't reflect. And we need it to live out this common purpose that God has given us. Given both husbands and wives. And that's oneness. This goal, this purpose of marriage is oneness. So, we're going to transition a little bit here. Because a great way to practice oneness is something that Foua and I call affirmations. And if you were here last month, then you got a little beginning of a taste of what this means. Okay? And we actually can help you out a little bit. We've got a little card here with affirmations summarized on it. And so Foua's going to pass that out. I'm going to give you a little reminder in case it's been a whole month. I mean, I barely remember what happens a month